Welcome to Personalized Lifestyle Medicine Institute. For the last 13 years, we have been providing education to tens of thousands of providers around the world. Our vision? Bringing thought leaders together to educate physicians and practitioners on utilizing personalized lifestyle approaches for chronic health conditions. By rallying industry leaders around our core values, we create a pathway for positive change in the healthcare system. Join us in 2025 as we introduce cutting-edge science with programs designed to grow the movement of personalized medicine. Visit our website to discover and join our programs. Through knowledge, we can all make a difference.
Welcome. I'm Dr. Jeff Bland, and I'm your host to this Personalized Lifestyle Medicine Institute educational program. This is another in our series for 2025 that I'm extraordinarily appreciative of being able to host because I think it hits into a very topical and important part of this emergent frontier of personalized lifestyle intervention. And that is we're going to talk about progress made in detoxification and managing toxicity, both endo and exotoxicity. And we have a fabulous panel of experts to discuss this topic, and we'll be addressing some of the maybe less common applications of detoxification that might be of value clinically to many of you, and putting in the context of where we kind of now sit as it relates to the science that underpins this very, very important topic of toxicity. So with that in mind, let me, if I can, move to the presentation, and I'll share my screen and we'll have at it. I want to remind you at the end of the three of our talks, we will be having this joint panel discussion, which I always find is one of the most interesting and provocative parts of the program. So I hope you'll stay tuned for the last half an hour of the program, where I have the opportunity to kind of play verbal jazz with our experts of the field. So here we go. Detoxification mastery, and maybe mastery is a little bit of a exaggeration because this is such a rapidly advancing field, and there's probably never the mastery. There's more of the continued progress towards mastery, I think, and we're going to hopefully contribute to that. Advanced strategies for in managing environmental toxicities. So here we go with an extraordinary panel of experts with Connie Zach, the world-renowned Dr. Jill Carnahan, mycotoxin expert, and Debbie Floyd. So I get the chance to kind of start this off and set the tone by giving some background information. So without further ado, let me move into approaches to clinical detoxification, a science-based overview of key detoxification systems. And again, I don't want to claim that we're going to do complete depth, breadth and depth of this topic, because it could go on for many, many hours. But I'll try to give you at least an overview of the landscape that associates itself with the kinds of things that we've learned that have clinical implication as it relates to toxicity and how they can be best managed in the patient. As you probably know, the clinical sign that often presents itself with the toxicity is some kind of immunological sign, fatigue-related sign, neurocognitive sign, something of low grade, low energy, fatigue, chronic pain, cognitive dysfunction, sleep disturbances. These really hard to get a handle on qualitative symptomatologies that reduce quality of life from patients. So what are the source and burden from environmental toxins? I think we now live in a world where we're being exposed to over 50,000 new to nature molecules that have been developed through the advent of chemistry and petrochemical reconfigurations. And those are the synthetic toxic materials. We often put them into the persistent organic pollutant family because they have organic chemistry associated with them. And so they're persistent because they don't easily break down in nature. And then we have the forever chemicals, which are really some of the most problematic. They're the fluorocarbons and the fluorinated hydrocarbons that really have no biological pathway for degradation. And so we call them forever, meaning they can stick around with a half-life that is extraordinarily long. something like radionuclides in terms of our environmental concern. So these come from all sorts of different areas, both from agricultural chemicals, industrial chemicals, byproducts of the petrochemical industry, gas and oil, and all those kinds of reconfigurations of plastics industry, pharmaceuticals, you name it, right? These are all reconfigured molecules that have their own personalities, for which we really didn't know so much about their individual, either short or longer term physiological influences beyond that of kind of understanding their direct toxicity. I call it toxicology, or maybe their direct carcinogenicity, meaning their ability to produce cancer in the short term. But over the long term of exposure at multiple compounds at a time, we really have not got much information other than the clinical empirical evidence of people living in this environment with their own genes and their own immune systems and their own nervous systems and how they're responding to them. So that kind of becomes the, I guess you'd call it the reality of this spectrum of clinical complaints or concerns that have been levied against the toxic burden as a result of the exposure to these chemicals. Really hard to pin down, give concise quantitative information, but there is more and more substantive information, both from controlled animal studies, from epidemiological studies in humans, from now case control types of studies, comparative analysis, all are indicating that this is a major contributor to this low-level burden of these family or orchestra of different new to nature molecules that influence our physiology in multiple ways. So that's what we term toxicity. It's chronic toxicity. It's not the kind of toxicity that toxicologists normally think of when they're talking about acute poisoning, but it's a chronic burden on our physiological systems, with the principal systems probably being the nervous and immune systems, where the first introduction of effects occurs. Now, if we look at amounts of these materials, it kind of becomes overwhelming. This is just some, data one could get from the literature to showing the magnitude. This is cities that produce the most toxins as it relates to toxic chemicals, the long-term, what we called not forever chemicals, but the persistent organic pollutant type chemicals. So if you look at the levels in pounds, it seems quite staggering, ranging from 756,000 pounds in Kotzebue, which is the North Slope oil, Alaska, to 10,000 to a million pounds. Oh, excuse me, I said 750,000. I meant 750 million. Shame on me. 756 million pounds. There we go. That should be a little bit of more of a get your attention number, ranging down to the 10 million tons. 10 million pounds of exposure in some of these Texas cities. So if you look at these cities closely, you'll notice that they align themselves with petrochemicals, with oil industry, oil either production or refining. And so this is part of the story, but not the whole story, because there are many other sources of toxicity that come from the use of those products in the formation of final products, and from other sources, non-petrochemical in nature, that we'll be discussing, that also produce a burden on the body's toxic management systems. Let's use one of those as an agricultural chemical, glyphosate. You're all familiar with it. It's been in the news considerably over the last few years. And this is kind of another interesting, sobering bit of information. The estimated agricultural use of glyphosate, this is from 2019 now, from the EPA at the time, looks at this map, and the map shows in the different colors of brown, the darkness of the shade of brown, how many pounds per square mile of glyphosate has been used. And it ranges from very low to as high as over 115 pounds that have been used per acre, or excuse me, per square mile. So you'll notice that around our agriculture belt, where we have a lot of corn, wheat, and soy, where there's a lot of monoculturing and a lot of heavy fertilization use, there is also a lot of this herbicide used as well, as one might expect, into the Dakotas. And so one gets again, just a view from one chemical of the potential exposure opportunity once it's getting into the water supply and influences in the biota and goes through the food contamination type of cycle. One might start to say, are there doses or levels of these chemicals that arrive at the level of threshold where the immune and nervous systems are influenced? And that's the point where I think we all are with regard to this question about toxic environment in which we are concerned about living. What are the chronic health problems that emerge from these exposures? Well, the list is long. The literature is rich. There are more and more studies being done looking retrospectively at regions of the country that have been exposed to high levels of various types of toxins and the increasing incidence of all sorts of disorders. It used to be cancer. We used to think of it around New Jersey. There was a paper published entitled, "Is Living in New Jersey Dangerous to Your Health?" It was in the Journal of Oncology. That was based on statistical information, and the answer is yes. If you're living over New Haven, excuse me, not New Haven, over to the coastal region of Newark, that the answer is yes. It does appear statistically that it's dangerous to your health to live in that area. And so we start looking at the nature of petrochemical bioconcentrated materials, so-called persistent organic pollutants, or sometimes really discussing their health implications. It goes all the way from cancer on one end to immunological disorders to cognitive dysfunctions to diabetes. You're all familiar with the work of Dr. Jacobs. It have become quite popularized. Epidemiologist from Minnesota who really started to first understand the association from these persistent organic pollutants, or what are often termed toxic, subchronic toxic substances, and the relationship they have to insulin sensitivity and to type 2 diabetes. So multiple conditions from the chronic energy VANRA all the way through very, very serious secondary effects that are associated with disease states. So this is not something to be taken lightly. That's, I think, the message that we take away from this emerging story. And to understand this even better, we have to recognize that the toxins to which we're exposed are not just that from the environment, the so-called exotoxins, but they're also toxins that are potentially manufactured in our own body, endotoxins. Endotoxins are a secondary byproduct of either our own metabolism or metabolism of our microbiome. Our microbiome, depending upon its composition, can convert the food of those microbes in our gut into secondary biochemicals, and the construction of the actual microbe itself, when it dies, it releases its own skeletons into the systemic circulation, or at least into the digestive tract. Things like lipopolysaccharides that are found as construction elements within the cell walls of gram-negative bacteria that live in our gut. So these lipopolysaccharides, particularly lipopolysaccharide B, are known to be an immune activator. They bind to toll-like receptors like TLR4. They activate the inflammatory cascade. And so now we get the secondary effects on our immune system through endotoxicity. They associate with leaky gut, alteration in gut mucosal permeability, all those things that we've studied and discussed in previous PLMI education courses. So it's the toxic total load that people experience. They don't have a separate load for endotoxins and a separate load for exotoxins. Their total load. And the model that's often used, or the metaphor, is a barrel, a rain barrel that you keep filling up with water from multiple sources until it arrives at the top, and now it starts spilling over. And when it starts spilling over, now you have the problem of the collateral damage to the floor as the water runs over from the barrel. That's the metaphor to these chronic illnesses that occur from the total load of toxins. These are generally lipophilic toxins, meaning they're fat soluble. They have long residence in the body. They sit around in fatty tissue stores. They're kind of set a higher body burden or concentration, and they can be seen in plasma levels, looking at levels in the blood as increasing burdens of these immuno and neurotoxic materials. So the story is not contrived, it's real, and it's something that we're getting much more understanding of the importance as it relates to medicine and health. Of those endotoxins and the association to our environment and our food supply, there's another family of toxins we're going to be discussing in this program in some detail. That's mycotoxins. This is mycofungal toxins because those microbes have their own metabolism. They produce these nitrogenous containing secondary metabolites that are called mycotoxins. They can be pretty dangerous because our body perceives them as poisons, so to speak, and they can actually induce all sorts of secondary adverse effects, both neurologically and immunologically. And again, we're going to talk much more about this during the course of this program, but I just wanted to introduce the concept that these mycotoxins, things like moldy grain, aflatoxin being one that you're probably familiar with, it's a carcinogen, hepatotoxin. These are a result of damp, moist conditions and the seeding with a fungal substance. And that starts to proliferate, producing its secondary metabolites, and now it becomes contaminated in that product, which we might consume, producing then an additional burden on our detoxification mechanisms. It's interesting to note that our gut microbiome also contains its own fungal species. This is the mycobiome, MYCO biome, and those fungi can either be friendly or not so friendly, again, depending upon their nature, their personality, and the metabolites that they produce. So this is all, again, part of our endotoxicity and its connection to our exotoxicity to our food supply system. So if you think of mycotoxins that relate to hepatotoxicity and cellular immune toxicity, they cut across many different food families and many different forms and chemical structures, but these are things that clearly add to the total body burden that we're concerned about as it relates to total toxicity. Now, how does our body protect itself from these? Knowing that we've never lived in a perfect environment, that we as organisms evolved in an imperfect environment that always had toxins present. So how did we survive? Going way back to the progenitors to the human organism, we can see the development evolutionarily of this very remarkable class of detoxifying enzymes. In fact, now in the human genome, they represent a very significant part of our human genome. Is these the coding for these proteins, these enzymes that are involved with the detoxification systems, barrier defense systems. And without those, we'd be at risk probably every day to our environment and know very quickly that our environment contains these toxins. But fortunately, we have these detox systems that evolved over millennia. We kind of categorize them into three classes. We call them phase 1, phase 2, and phase 3. You've probably heard these terms before. A lot of that detoxification phase 1, 2, and 3 enzyme activity occurs in the liver or in the digestive mucosa, which is where principal activity occurs in the production of these toxins. And so the formation of these detox pathways and processes are very, very important for us to defend against an imperfect environment. We know that there are things we can do to clean up our environment, clean up our gut health, but we don't have complete control. We're still subject to the things that are happening in the outside world. So we need to have appropriate detox protection systems working on our behalf. So a number of years ago, and now this would be in my professional life over 30 years ago now, going on 40 years ago, When we were talking about these processes, I suggested that we put together kind of a little bit of a visual diagram of how this works. And we produced this first diagram around the kind of symbolic structure of the liver, talking about phase 1, phase 2, phase 3 detoxification. And I'm very pleased to say that over the decades now, this has really caught stickiness and has been used many, many times. It's in many textbooks. It's now become kind of a standard of identity. And when I think back to when we penciled this out on the coffee table, a group of us here years ago in the progenitor to the Institute for Functional Medicine, I'm very pleased to see how it's evolved to be now a commonly used way of putting together a lot of information that can be made more accessible to patients. So we talk about phase 1, phase 2, and we recognize that the phase 1 of the cytochrome P450 enzyme system is very important. It's the first level of taking these fat-soluble materials and starting to convert them into something that's more water-soluble so they can be excreted into the stool or the urine, because that's principally a water medium. And so that functionalization occurs by the phase 1 cytochrome P450s that are selective for individual substrates. So they have different activities with different structures of different lipophilic toxins. And what we learned is that there are certain kinds of nutrients that are necessary for this process. These cytochrome P450s are iron-containing cytochromes. They produce their activities by oxidation because they add oxygen moieties to molecules to make them more polar. And so this oxidation process leads to the potential of intermediate reactive oxygen species. And so it's very important to know that as we increase detoxification, we have to also make sure that we're not producing excess toxic byproducts by then moving into phase 2, which is where these intermediary biotransformed intermediates get captured and put into a water-soluble medium by conjugation. It could be glucuronidation, sulfation, and could be involved with a process of having different sugar residues, glycination, amino acid conjugation. All of these become ways to take that polar molecule and make it water soluble so that it can be eliminated in the stool or feces. And that particular process of phase 2 detoxification is also influenced by diet. And we recognize that there are certain foods that contain certain phytochemicals that speak to the genes that upregulate the production of these phase 2 detoxifying enzymes. Pretty exciting stuff about this evolutionary history of connection between our diet and specific agents in our diet and the relationship to detoxification. And then these final detoxified agents get eliminated through the kidneys into the urine, or get combined with bile and ultimately end up into the stool and eliminated through our stool. And it's that process that then leads to the appropriate regulation of our ability to live in an imperfect environment. So that's a long-winded discussion of an ever even longer technical discussion about this process. And we know that work has been done showing that the process of detoxification is somewhat acid-alkaline sensitive. It tends to work better when the body's not in a acid side of pH. And so alkalinization actually is very helpful. It's things that we call an alkaline ash diet helps the kidney to eliminate these biotransformed toxins. So we want to stay away from high acid producing foods as it relates to detoxification. It needs to be more on the alkaline side, which is generally means more fruits and vegetables and less animal products. And so that becomes another step in this whole cycle. And we also need to think about a genomic difference. This is a wonderful article written by Dr. Joseph Bizzarno. Many of you know him as really one of the world's leaders in this whole area of toxicity and detoxification. Former founder and president of Bastyr University, now actually rejoined Bastyr as the interim president. And he has done a marvelous job in helping us to understand the role that different genotypic variation has on detoxification through these detox enzymes, these cytochrome P450 enzymes that control cytochrome P450 1B1, A1, E2, the various forms that are involved with different kind of detoxification principles. And so genomics plays a role in your detox personality. Now, we also know that these substances that can be toxic are not always petrochemical in origin or involved with secondary byproducts of biota like microbiology or bacteriology, but they also can be heavy metals, arsenic, lead, cadmium, mercury, even concentrations of aluminum, not a heavy metal, but another metalloid that has impact and toxicity when accumulated. So we now recognize that when we're talking about total load, you have to include these heavy metals as well in the way we're going to detoxify. And then the question is, how do we get rid of them? Well, one of the ways that has been identified through a number of clinical studies to help get rid of both the organic toxins and the mineral toxins is through perspiration, through the skin. It's not solely through our urine and feces, but it also can be facilitated through sweating. And this goes back historically to sweat lodges and cultural use in various cultures for medicinal purposes for centuries. And so that takes us into, the multiple ways that one can produce the increased loss of these toxins through either the urine, the feces, or through sweat. And so sweating does represent itself as a detoxification process. As I quote from this article, sweating offers potential and deserves consideration to assist with the removal of toxic elements from the body, as toxic elements are implicated in many serious chronic conditions. We need to be more selective in our understanding of how the body burden can be reduced through the removal of these accumulated sources, including dietary interventions, and in this case, sweating. There's a clear need for more robust trials around these various methods for detox, but I would have to say over the last 20 years, we've really seen tremendous progress being made in clinical experience and outcome trials that demonstrate the value of reducing body burdening of toxins and the improvement of function of individuals' cognitive function, energy, sleep, immune function, reduction in pain. I mean, all this constellation of things that occur as a chronic symptom of toxicity start to be improved through these interventions. We also know that diets that are rich in prebiotic fibers, both soluble and insoluble fibers, very important for helping to eliminate these bacterial toxins that occur from endotoxicity, and also with ammonia detoxification in cases of individuals that are protein overloaded and are not properly able to manage the secondary byproducts of the nitrogen coming from dietary protein. Again, we see the dietary fiber helps to bind and to participate as a prebiotic material in the reconstruction of the gut microbiome and the elimination or the reduction of these toxic byproducts that occur from certain types of gram-negative bacteria. So all, again, is important as it relates to diet when we talk about dietary fiber, both soluble and insoluble fibers. And so last, we come back to this sauna, this sweating. Sauna is a valuable tool for a variety of clinical conditions that are associated with endo and exotoxicity or total body burden toxicity. Here's just one of the kinds of studies that have talked about this. Is actually from a treasured colleague of ours in the field of detoxification, Dr. Walter Crennion. Unfortunately, Walter left us just a few years ago as a leader in clinical detoxification, and left a number of really extraordinary students who have now grown up to lead the field in clinical detoxification. And he was certainly a big proponent of sauna as a valuable clinical tool for improving health outcomes across a range of clinical conditions, including cardiovascular-like symptoms like hypertension. And so if we think of what type of sauna, one that rises up to be prominent with increasing research that's being done are the near infrared and far infrared sauna technologies. And we've spoken about this in a previous PLMI program, so I don't want to reiterate all of the information that we shared on that. You can go back in our archive and find it. But suffice it to say that certain wavelengths of infrared light, the far infrared region of the spectrum, is extraordinarily valuable. It penetrates the skin. It induces then kind of this interesting effect on thermal regulation which induces kind of sweating. And so we started getting into this whole kind of value proposition of the saunas, the type of saunas, the duration of sauna, and its contribution to the detoxification process of both endo and exotoxins of both lipophilic and non-lipophilic type. It has a pan detoxification effect. This is going to be talked about in much greater detail by our clinical experts here in a moment, but I just wanted to set the tone as to how this all kind of fits together in integrated toxicology that is emerging as this new therapeutic potential. So far infrared saunas for the treatment of cardiovascular risk factors has been reviewed in a peer-reviewed publication published a few years ago. This is work that was done up in Canada, in which far infrared sauna became approved by the Canadian Standards Association, and it's now considered to be a therapy of value from the clinical science. It's been done in detoxification, and to go back to Dr. Crinion's work to support a variety of clinical applications, including cardiovascular risk factors. So if we looked at the toxicity detoxification conundrum from a clinical summary perspective, I think we're clear that there are really two things we need to be focusing on. The first is remove the source of the toxin, eliminating the body burden to the extent possible. So get away from moldy food, get away from a moldy house, no direct exposure to air and water pollution. Don't live in an environment intentionally that subjects you to continuously to airborne pollutants or waterborne pollutants. Treat your water if you are in such an area. Make sure your air is as clean as you can make it in your home or workplace environment. And no exposure to toxic metals. Think about mercurials that you might have had exposed to you in dentistry. Keep away from lead exposure. Now, fortunately, we've got it out of gasoline. That's a big step in the right direction. Arsenic is still a huge problem. It ends up in our food supply system and our environment from the use in paints and the use in arsenicals that are associated with agricultural chemicals. Cadmium is another one. Cadmium concentration in the soil. You see it in some of the things, particularly coming from Asia, where there's a lot of soil contamination with cadmium, and it ends up in soy products. So again, we'd be very cautious to eliminate to the extent possible these exposures. And then to support detoxification process of the hepatic phase 1, 2, and 3, glucosinolates from crucifers, the cabbage, broccoli, cauliflower, Brussels sprout family, containing these phytochemicals that upregulate detoxification enzymes. You know about those. We'll study them in greater detail, but it's certainly a good part of the detox program. Indole-3-carbinol, indole-dienoylmethane, and then improve your microbiome integrity, remembering how important the microbiome is on the overall body burden of potential endotoxins. So the use of pre and probiotics of the appropriate type. Increased water consumption, you want to flush these things out, and I recommend obviously very pure water. Increased soluble and insoluble fiber for the reasons that we've discussed, and then this far infrared sauna technology, all part of an integrated approach towards detoxification. So I think hopefully I've given you a reasonably good overview of this topic, which is advancing all the time. Now we're fortunate that we've got extraordinary experts that are going to discuss this in greater detail, and then we'll come back at the end with this panel discussion among the group. So thanks for staying with me, and now we'll turn it over to the deep information from our clinical perspective. Thank you.
At PLMI, we love sharing the latest in personalized health, and your membership ensures that you won't miss a thing. Our online platform keeps you updated on upcoming events, and you can even sync with your own personal calendar. Membership includes access to a library of programs from the past 14 years. And now you can connect with Dr. Bland on demand.
Help me explain microbial imbalance.
Dr. Bland has created a digital avatar of himself, trained on his 30-year legacy of functional medicine. It's like having his expertise in your pocket. To join us, visit plminstitute.org. Together, we can bring personalized healthcare to everyone.
Hi, I'm Connie Zach, co-founder of Sunlighten, and I am honored to be presenting to PLMI again this year. I have been studying infrared light energy for over 25 years, and I look forward to sharing some of the highlights regarding infrared light energy, specifically those connected to detoxifying the body. So over 25 years ago, my brother was chronically ill. He tried everything to help himself and nothing worked. It wasn't until his dentist identified that his fillings made of mercury were leaking into his body and causing the chronic fatigue, the pain, the vertigo, and all of the other uncomfortable symptoms that left him in his bed, not doing anything. He's an artist and he couldn't paint, he couldn't do anything because he was so listless. Finally, when his dentist recognized the mercury toxicity in his body, he said, Jason, there's a technology called infrared that potentially could help detoxify the body. I think that's the root of all of this. If you can get the mercury out of your body, you could help yourself feel better. That's exactly what he did. He recommended an infrared sauna. My brother bought one, used it, and it changed his life. I saw this transformation. I was working at Procter & Gamble on the pharmaceutical side, and I was amazed. I will be honest, I was very skeptical because my brother was so sick, and then all of a sudden, day by day, he was getting better. So I started doing my own research on infrared technology, and I found an abundance of data that was significant, especially on the cardiovascular system. And I was studying on the antihypertensive part of the business, and so I knew how difficult it is to help somebody lower blood pressure, help them change their endothelial function, do anything to help the heart be healthier without adversely affecting the rest of the body. But infrared did. So I changed my career path. I changed my life. I joined forces with my at the time, my boyfriend who became my fiance, who is now my husband, and my business partner. And we set out to put science behind this technology of infrared, talk to experts that are way more brilliant than we are, and bring a more effective, more efficient technology to the marketplace. It's our passion. We are dedicated not only to help people feel better, but ultimately bring this light to people so that they have hope and happiness for higher quality lives. We really want people to be able to feel better as a result of what we do every day, ultimately do more of what they love to do, and to live their fullest life possible. I'm really excited to talk to you today about specifically how infrared can help detoxify the body and ultimately make you feel better. So what is current reality? Current reality is no matter what we do, no matter how hard we try to live a clean, healthy life, we step outside and we are exposed to toxic chemicals. We are exposed to many toxic chemicals every single day. There is a study that was just published saying that each human may have a spoon's worth of plastic inside their brain. There is no way to avoid that. So what we need to do is to find ways to protect ourselves. Also in the study, what troubled me is over the past 8 years, the concentration of microplastic chemicals increased by 50%. What are we going to do? That's what I'm here to talk to you about today, is this wonderful healing energy called infrared. Why does infrared work so effectively on detoxifying the body? Here's the scoop. It impacts every single pathway for detoxification in your body. How does it do that? It's energy medicine. Infrared light energy is transferred into your body. It is absorbed deeply into your water molecules and your mitochondria. It starts to change all of those. That change increases your core temperature. It causes mobility. It causes flow. That flow starts to move everything around and mobilize all the toxins. It starts to help all of your different systems by setting off this biochemical cascade that impacts all of your biologic processes, all of your systems, and starts to help the healing process. Dr. Hyman, who has been frequently using a sunlight and infrared sauna for over 20 years, talks about how infrared saunas can help with detoxification, specifically validating the fact that they do improve your circulation. They help with weight loss. They help balance the blood sugar and ultimately overall improve detoxification, which significantly helps your brain function. So that's going to go back to that spoon's worth of toxins in your brain and help to mobilize all that, remove all of that so that you have a healthier, longer life. And what's really important to us at Sunlighten is to help with the hallmarks of aging, to help increase your longevity, but ultimately help you feel better while you age. That's what's really important, is that you enjoy life. You're not just enduring it. So let's talk about Bree Arkinsinger's data. This is an important piece of data to me because I know Bree. She's a personal friend. She is the definition of a rock star. She's so fit and so healthy and is so dedicated to her work. She's known as the Betty Rocker. But she, in 2017, experienced toxicity herself. So she decided to get really serious about her health, invested in a sunlight and sauna, and the infrared energy in the sunlight significantly impacted in a positive way how she felt, as well as her blood work. Before she started using a sunlight and sauna, she had mercury levels of 15.65 that dropped all the way to 1.44 after using the sunlight and infrared sauna in only 1 year of use. Another game-changing study is called the BUS study, known as the blood, urine, sweat study. This study was done by Dr. Genois, who is an OBGYN whose mission was to help toxin-exposed pregnant women. How can he find ways to reduce their toxic burden so they have the ultimate healthy pregnancies? So what he did is he started measuring their blood, urine, and sweat. And what he found is significant, that blood and urine may miss some of the toxins that sweat exposes. He showed that 80% of the participants had cadmium in their sweat, but it was not detected in blood and urine. And really one of the most disturbing pieces of data was that 15% of the participants tested their blood for mercury and they didn't have any. But when they tested their sweat, 100% of those same participants had mercury in their sweat. That just shows you how powerful that sweat can be and how important it is to pay attention to the data when it comes to the content of your sweat. Additionally, I get asked the question all the time about how does infrared compare to exercise? How does infrared compare to traditional? Is infrared more effective? And the BUS study showed that infrared outperformed both exercise and traditional saunas for detoxifying the body. Infrared removed more bismuth, cadmium, chromium, mercury, and uranium, just to be specific, to call it a couple of the elements, more so than exercise alone, as well as traditional saunas. And part of that is because of the fact that this light energy is absorbed into the cells. So it is a cellular detoxification versus a surface sweat. This BUS study helped us reframe the way we look at sweat for detoxification. It should not be forgotten and it should be taken seriously. And we should remember to find ways to sweat, especially sweating at a deep level so that it mobilizes all of our toxins and helps us to eliminate them in all of the different pathways, because it's about all of the detox pathways versus just sweat. So keep that in mind. One of the benefits of infrared is it impacts all of the systems. It impacts all the biological processes in your body. So it is going to help you be healthier as a result of this easy to access, easy to use tool. And even if you can't have one in your own home, it is something that you could go someplace, you could talk to your, provider, you can talk to your patients, you can find ways to incorporate infrared into your lifestyle. It is truly aligned with the PLMI approach as far as a personalized lifestyle approach. It is something that's easy, it is not extreme, it feels great, and once you do it, you want to do it again and again. So in summary, we have had at Sunlighten an abundance of people sharing their success stories. It makes my heart so full when I hear people talking about how they helped get them cured from Lyme disease, mold toxicity, heart issues, energy levels, better sleep, helping with their depression, helping, with their energy, helping them with their skin. There's so many different ways that we have helped transform people's lives. And I am here today to just shed that little bit of light to all of you so that when you are talking to the people in your life that you are counseling, they're going through so much. And this is an easy tool that they feel great while they're in there, and they feel even better when they get out. I really am honored again to be here and talk to you all at PLMI. And I am here as a resource. If you need anything, you have any questions about infrared light energy, I hope my time with you today was helpful and empowering and enlightening for the people that you were talking to about helping them detoxify. Thank you very much.
When we think of sunlight, we look outward. But how does light affect us? Just beyond the rainbow, there's a safe and gentle, invisible light, infrared. Near infrared and red light stimulate cell health and growth. They also ignite our body's energy factories, called mitochondria. This fuels our bodies so we function better and have more energy. Mid and far infrared waves gently vibrate water cells throughout our body. This creates a biochemical cascade that helps improve every system. Just as exercise strengthens our muscles, infrared therapy strengthens our cells. Many of us spend less and less time outside, depriving us of the infrared we desperately need. Sunlighten's infrared saunas harness the healing powers of the sun, delivering infrared that provides systemic, whole-body health benefits.
Thank you all for joining me today for this primer on toxin binders. For those that don't know me, I'm Debbie Floyd, founder of Discovery Health Solutions. We're a teaching institute for integrative practitioners. Our team has taught detox protocols to practitioners at our workshops for the past 15 years, including coaching hundreds of individuals worldwide with chronic health concerns. I have also had personal experience using binders for many protocols, including Lyme disease, bacterial, fungal, parasitic infections, and heavy metal detox. Using binders has become a part of life for me. So let's get started today. We are going to be teaching a little bit about what are binders, okay? But I believe most of our listeners today may already be familiar to some degree with what binders are, and some of you may be hearing about it for the first time. So therefore, I'm going to begin kind of with the basics. what binders do and how to use them properly. Here's our roadmap here. So what are binders? Think binders as a deep cleanup team, a deep cleanup crew. Basically, they're absorbing and sweeping out the dirt and debris in our life. Binders happen to be inert compounds found in nature and are GI active agents. Binders are known to some as toxin binders, detox binders, etc. They're utilized in the gut with properties that enable them to bind and absorb toxins in the GI tract and interrupt recirculation in the liver and prevent recirculation of the toxic load. We all know what toxins are, and they're anything unnatural that accumulates in our body, right? From the environment, our water, air, food sources, things we place on our skin, our clothing, sunscreens, etc. Toxins become stored in our organs, in our fat, and accumulate in our cells. They can displace our good and necessary minerals that are in our cells. Toxins can be hidden and accumulate for a long time until symptoms occur, and pathogens tend to also accumulate where toxins are stored. Binders help the body evacuate toxins by absorbing or accumulating toxins in the gut so they can be effectively swept out of the body naturally for elimination without being reabsorbed by the body. Without a binder on board, a patient runs the risk of recirculation of toxins throughout the body. This happens during the liver phases of functions. Binders safely reduce the body's toxic load, including the die-off reactions that occur from taking antimicrobials or antibiotics. We do all have toxins, so therefore binders are a crucial part of any treatment protocol. A few other benefits of binders, okay? They safely escort toxins from the liver to the bowel for elimination in the bowel, in the feces, versus the kidney. The kidney is a very fragile organ, and when you're detoxifying, removing toxins, we really try to not let anything escape the body through the kidneys. The easiest, simplest, and safest way is when it comes out of the liver, as you see over here. The waste products can go either way, through the kidneys, or you can choose the gallbladder through the bile and through the intestines, through the feces. We choose that way by using a binder. A binder enables things to be accumulated and moved out that way versus moved in through the kidneys and urine. Okay, that's a really important thing to have in your mind. They also alkalize the body. They help with gastric issues like gas, bloating, diarrhea, constipation. They have the ability, in some cases, to lower cholesterol to some degree. And they do mitigate free radicals by reducing, the effects of EMF exposure, radiation, etc. Okay. Binders prevent what is called enterohepatic recirculation of toxins. That means the liver. The liver is the area where this can occur. Toxins are absorbed in the small intestine. They kind of come up this way if you follow the arrows. They're biotransformed when they get into the liver. There's two phases of the liver, phase 1 and 2. One oxidizes and one conjugates. Basically, they put them into a situation, the toxins can be moved out of the body and excreted through the bowels, through the bile, going down this way. The gallbladder creates the bile, and it mixes with the bile and can move out of the body. Digestive enzymes, intestinal flora, etc. Basically help the substance, enable it to reabsorb into the intestinal capillaries. And then recirculation kind of happens at that time, but we don't want the toxins to be recirculated. So how do we stop that? What we need to do during this time is we put binders on board. The binders will grab them so they don't recirculate. And what they end up doing, they're captured and the toxins are removed out with the bile through the stool. So in a nutshell, in a real simple way, that's kind of how it happens and why binders are important. So that your toxins, when you're detoxing, will not recirculate. Okay. When to consider binders? Well, you consider binders anytime that a patient is undergoing any procedure and treatment. Binders are useful for all the things you see here, from the dental amalgam removal, the heavy metals, root canal infections, all the infections, fungal, parasitic, mold, biotoxin, mycotoxin, and bacterial infections, Lyme disease, co-infections, also viral infections, any residuals you have in your body related to estrogen dominance, people with diabetes, steroids, any steroid use that's there, it helps clean that up. But one cool thing that people don't realize, it really helps during pregnancy, before we are trying to conceive, in order to do preconception health, remove toxins from the body so you can have best outcomes for your baby. And postpartum care, it's really good because breastfeeding support is really important for the baby to have non-toxic, if possible, breast milk. So these are things we find that are really good reasons to use binders. Okay. There are so many types of binders. Some are good for general use and some are good for, I would say, complicated issues. Every binder has specific characteristics that make it better for one person versus the other. You know, we all are individual people. We all can't eat the same food. We all have different allergies or, you know, different things that we may, you know, have issues with as far as processing foods, digesting foods. We're all different. So you have to know your body, number one, and work with your practitioner if you have a complicated issue. But in general, anyone can use certain binders. And I'm going to go through them with you in a little bit, slide by slide, on binder by binder. But here's the general thing. They come in pill, powder, gel, or tincture form. And you can take them in any form you want. That makes it easy and easier for you to take. You must do them on an empty stomach for them to work, because you don't want them mixing with your food. You want to digest and reabsorb the food. Okay, so the idea would be is to take them away from food, and when you're going to be mobilizing and doing things to help move those toxins, and then grab them and absorb them. So again, empty stomach, 60 minutes away from food or medicines. Take with a lot of water. I would suggest 12 to 16 ounces, you know, at least a nice good glass of water, and take water throughout the day. Hydration is key. You know, our bodies are made of water. We need a lot of water just to function. So you got to drink a lot of water every day. If you're not drinking water, you're dehydrated. Okay, so you've got to get used to drinking water, and soda is not included in this. It has to be good, pure water. And I also recommend adding good minerals to your water, like electrolytes, so you can get your minerals in your water. The reason hydration is important too is for bowel movements. You know, you need to look at your bowel movements. Okay, you need to look at the color, the quality, you know, and how many times a day you move your bowels. It's kind of good to kind of know who you are, what you normally do. And your goal was at least to move at least once a day. It would be great if you could do it 2 or 3 times a day. But a lot of people don't even do it once a day, we find. It's a shocking. So anyone can get to that point. And the idea is drink a lot of water and hydrate, and add in some binders, and things will start moving. There's a thing called the Bristol stool chart. I didn't put a picture of it up here, but you can easily look it up online. The Bristol stool chart gives you pictures and diagrams of what is good bowel movement and not. Okay, another big key is chart your protocol. Timing is important for administrating all your daily protocols, and your practitioners, you should all have a way of guiding your patients so that they can do that and then chart their progress. And part of charting would be how they're moving their bowels. Okay. I also recommend using liver, lymph, and kidney drainage remedies when you're doing this, because you want to make sure things are moving, and we can tend to get backed up in our organs. Our liver, lymph, and kidney can hold a lot of toxin and accumulate toxins. So you need support, and there's different drainage remedies that are available from many good manufacturers. I use the Pecana remedies, for example. They're easy to take in the morning. Okay. How to choose binder? Okay, I have 2 different categories that I'm going to give you quickly in your mind. If you're a healthy person and you just occasionally want to do a cleanse, you know, if you're fasting during Lent, some people do cleanses then, or if you're exercising, trying to lose a little weight, but you're typically healthy, these are 3 good choices: Chlorella, bioactive charcoal, and fruit pectin. Okay, they're safe. The reason they're good, they're safe, they're easy to absorb for most people, and you can use them, you know, some of them, the chlorella and fruit pectin, you can use regularly, but activated charcoal, if you just need it here and there, it's a no-brainer to have on board. And those are 3 things I recommend everyone should even have in their, you know, kitchen cabinet at home to have available when they need them. Patients with chronic health concerns, you really need to choose wisely. I have a list here of the binders here: chlorella, charcoal, fruit pectin, zeolite, clays, cubic and fulvic acid, silica, fiber, and cholestyramine. These are things that most people are recommended to use by their healthcare practitioner based on their health concern. And I'll go through these things, but you need to choose wisely because each one of these binders has a different affinity for different toxins. You don't want to use a binder that is not going to truly bind to the toxin you're trying to eliminate. So I want to kind of go through that. Okay, the first one, chlorella. Chlorella comes in two forms, Pyran nodosa and vulgaris. Those are blue-green algae. They're rich in vitamins, minerals, amino acids, and they're really good for you. They really are food themselves. They are grown off the shores of Korea and Southeast Asia, and they do keep the seas very clean. That's kind of their purpose. And they do capture a lot of toxins. They're very easy and safe to take. They bind to heavy metals, pesticides, herbicides, molds, mycotoxin, VOCs. A dose for detox would be minimum of 20 to 60 small little tablets you can take a day. I recommend that you can chew them if you're doing dental or jaw detox. You can chew them in your mouth. They make a little green paste and you can spit them out. If you just had some dental procedures done, it really helps capture anything that may be circulating in the mouth, or they're just swallowed for general use. They're very safe. You can start low with a few and add more to it and adjust individually with it. The next one, it's really my favorite, is modified citrus pectin or apple pectin powder. I'm sure you've heard the phrase, an apple a day keeps the doctor away. This is just fiber. It's natural fiber. It's a potent fiber. It's highly absorbable. It's beneficial for binding of a variety of compounds, specifically heavy metals, and specifically lead. It has a high affinity to lead, mycotoxins, to herbicides and pesticides. It's gentle on the body, can be taken any time of the day. It's safe for children. Pectins are not as strong as charcoals and clays. Pectins are very effective when included in an anti-inflammatory protocol. They have also immune modulating properties, and it's really great for people that have autoimmune conditions. I personally take them every day. The fiber comes from natural food sources. So it's typically, as you see in the picture, limes, oranges, and apples. It's a prebiotic acting as food for the body's beneficial gut bacteria. That's another positive. And it complements any probiotic therapy to restore your gut microbiome. It really is a favorite. The one I like using, the brand I use, is Pectisol, just because I add it to my morning beverage. I even add it to my morning coffee, and it's easy to consume and safe. I love it. Next one, I like to chat about, bioactive charcoal. This is another favorite to always have in your cabinet because it's used when things come up. It's used on short-term basis mostly. For example, if you're having some dental work done and you're having some heavy metals that you need to clean out, you'd want to go with this. For yeast and mold treatments, if you have, have recently interacted some mold in a moldy house or something, you're having issues, the doctor could recommend a little bit of activated charcoal. It's good for cleaning up parasites, and specifically, you have food poisoning. If you think you ate something bad, grab that charcoal out of your cabinet and take a little bit. One dose, usually it comes in capsules, 500 milligrams. I love that. And let's see, the brand I like right now is made by Cellcore. Cellcore makes some really good binders and they're safe and it's a trusted source. Okay, next one, clays. Clays are well known. They've been used for centuries. They come from volcanic minerals. And bentonite clay, French queen clay, and zeolites are the names you hear. They're all pretty much clays, right? They come in liquids, powders, sprays, okay? They're used internally and externally, internally for biotoxins, heavy metals, parasites, food poisoning again, and airborne things. So they do help, grab anything that you've also breathed in. External use, people have shingles, skin rashes, eczema, toe fungus, wart removal, etc. Cradle cap. Used as body wraps and facials. You see them in spas being used because they do grab the toxins out. You can make a poultice, out of some of the powders that they come in. As you can see, there's doses that I suggested a few doses on the right. I'm not going to go through the dosing of that, but it's individual for this, depending on how you're going to use it. So they're really great. So clays, though, I want a little warning with clays. They have the potential to bind to some beneficial nutrients. So the symptoms related to release should be monitored. This is why when you're using these, it's good to keep a little chart, okay, and record things to know when it's time to stop, or if it's time to switch up and try another binder, if you still need a binder, if clays aren't going to be good for you, if you're finding you're lacking in minerals. You can switch up and you can use these binders and layer them in during the day with other things like chlorella during the day. A good source that I like is this G-Pure company, because many times we notice that some of the clays could be toxic themselves. So it's really good to find a reputable company that has really good products that are as clean as possible when you're going to be taking them in to get rid of your toxins. You don't want to add more toxins. So we can recommend later on, we'll recommend a few other ones to you that may be of interest to you. Fulvic and humic acid. Okay. Humus is an organic compound made from earth soil. Okay. Rocks, sediments, bodies of water, they contain trace minerals, electrolytes, fatty acids, and silica. And the silica is the thing that boosts collagen synthesis. So it also has the ability to be a probiotic and a prebiotic. So these are really good to consider taking. It is a form of natural chelation therapy. Humic acids are capable of binding to and breaking down toxins and metals that enter the body through the food supply, water, prescription medicine, household products, and air pollution. They bind specifically to glyphosate, which is, we're hearing a lot about that. That's Roundup that's been put on the soil for weeds, environmental toxins, plastics, pesticides, etc. Also mercury and arsenic. Okay, so it's good for these. It's good for just toxins in general. So highly recommended. It's good for your gut health and for immune function. And again, I suggest the Cellcore's biotoxin binder is really good for this one. Okay. Silica, okay, also known as silicon dioxide. Silica is lovely. It comes in several forms, okay, silica gel. It's one company called Enterish Gel, purified silica powder, IMD, which is a naturally occurring compound in silicone. We use these a lot for methyl mercury removers, specifically IMD. Is used for dental amalgam removal by a lot of biological dentists who recommend it. It goes very deep. All silica has the affinity toward removing toxic metals, aluminum, thallium, tin, and they go deeply into the intestines for intestinal binding. What I can say about the silica too, there's another product that's liquid BioCell, liquid drops that are really, really good when you want to get your silica in. But if you're trying to remove multi-minerals, I do recommend the IMD. It's micronized silica, it goes deeper. Quicksilver is the brand I use for intestinal metal detox. It's really the go-to for dental mercury removal safely. To use it, the dosing of that, I give suggested dosing here. If you're going to be using it in that micronized powder form, you add it to water, you stir it. And I do suggest that you add it to a solution of vitamin C or a phospholipid suspension, because it'll help you absorb it easier and help it, you'll go into your cells much deeper. So it's highly recommended for that. And again, usually definitely do that on an empty stomach. Okay. Psyllium husk, which is fiber. Fiber's been, again, used for many, many years, all kinds of fiber. The fiber you see mostly that would be sold would be from a plant called the Plantago ovata plant seed. It's a soluble fiber. It adds bulk to bowel movements. It binds to intestinal toxins. Many people use this regularly who do like regular cleanses, daily cleanses, or people sometimes doing sauna therapies. If they want to add in a little quick binder, they'll add this in. It just adds bulk, and it's good for people that have occasional constipation or diarrhea. It does have laxative properties, and many people that have IBS, Crohn's disease type symptoms, their doctors will recommend them to go on some type of a psyllium husk fiber. It also has the capability of lowering blood sugar to some degree, and it is a bulking agent used in weight loss. And again, you try that out. Another binder here that is really a compounded binder. You need to get this from compounding pharmacy. You would need a script for it. It's called a styramine. The reason we love it, it's used for mold and biotoxin illness. It's extremely effective in that. It binds to gut toxins. Dr. Richie Shoemaker made this kind of famous because he kind of brought it out, from the archives. It hasn't been used for a while by doctors until he decided to bring it back into play and use it with his BEG spray for CIRS, chronic inflammatory response syndrome. That's related to mold illness. Okay. So very effective for people dealing with mold illness. But I do recommend you work with the doctor with this if you're going to get it, and keep track of it and see how well you do with it. It also had in the past been used mostly for lowering LDL cholesterol, and some people still use it for that and see some positive benefits with that. Okay, I went through all the basic binders that are mostly recommended and used by physicians for their patients, but you will see a lot of combination binders on the market these days. There's a lot of combination supplements and tinctures on the market. I suggest you use caution before you just go out on your own and try using them if you haven't used any binder yet. So it's not recommended for beginner binders to use combination binders that have 3 or 4 types of binders in them. I suggest you start low and go slow with regular binders because different individuals have different reactions to different binders. You need to know your body, test them out, because patient compliance is crucial to things moving forward. But as you find that you do well with certain binders, it's easier maybe, instead of layering them all at different times, it is easier to get a combination binder. So that's the only time I recommend trying one and buying one after you've had success with taking individual binders. The recommended binders that I like and have used are from the ones below. Supreme Nutrition makes Glypho X Supreme, great success with that. Many people have had. Quicksilver Scientific has Ultra Binder. Biobotanical Research, Rachel Fresco developed one called GI Detox, and Cellcore, their biotoxin binders, are highly recommended for combinations. Okay. Now, since I went through the binders, you're going to say, oh my gosh, there's so much there. How do I choose them when I'm really dealing with a specific situation, especially those of you that have patients or that have, for example, heavy metal toxicity, Lyme disease, bacterial infections, or fungal infections. Those seem to be the 3 areas that are used most or with binders, and people get really confused. So I'm going to highlight those 3 right now. So in general, for heavy metal, chlorella, modified citrus, pectin, zeolite, humic, and fulvic acids would be your choices to look at first and try with your patient. Also, a little tip with that, we combine some chelators with it. ALA and DMSA work really well with those binders for moving out heavy metals. Cilantro tincture, or just taking cilantro right from your garden and taking that down, mobilizes mercury. Okay, so those with a lot of mercury amalgams, be careful, with taking the cilantro at all, unless you have a binder on board, because mercury moves throughout your body and mobilizes right away with cilantro. But it's perfect if you have your binder in. So, I suggest, take 10 drops of it in water. If you get a tincture with meals, do it 1 hour before your binder, and it really works quite quickly, moving that mercury out where you want it to go. Always use kidney, liver, and lymph drainage remedies. I do like the pecana drops in water. Take them away from binders. Sauna therapy and lymph brushing and rebounder and exercise, moving the body and heating the body works really well synergistically when you're trying to move heavy metals out with the binders and those chelators. The next one, Lyme and co-infections. Everyone seems to have some, Lyme showing up one time in their life. Lyme seems to hide out and become activated in our patients' bodies from time to time. So it's always good to have chlorella, clays, and fulvic acids around for the patients that have Lyme, persistent Lyme, or Lyme that gets activated, or have continual and persistent bacterial infections. The focus with using binders here is to eliminate Herxheimer reactions, which are the die-off effects that we have from taking antibiotics or antimicrobials. Again, begin the binder as a test before you start doing your antimicrobial protocol. And in Lyme disease specifically, always replace the minerals, always add more magnesium, and potassium, etc. And B vitamins, a lot of people tend to have the MTHFR issue. It's the gene, the anti-detox gene, who also seem to have persistent Lyme and co-infections. So as a little tip. Binders for fungal and mycotoxins would be bioactive charcoal, bentonite clay, zeolites, modified citrus pectin, and that cholestyramine. Take again in the morning and before bedtime, should be twice a day with that. And sauna therapy is extremely effective for fungal and mycotoxin detox. Okay, so lymph brushing as well. Combine it with glutathione and bioflow support. IV vitamin C works really well with these binders. Okay, so here's the thing. Here's part of like the takeaways on this, okay, that I want you to take away. You do have the slides that I gave you that give you the basics. You can go back to those, but this is the thing to take. How do you sequence the protocol? This is how it becomes effective. Look at this. AM, start in the morning. As soon as someone gets up, you begin the day. Okay. Drainage support comes in then. You need to protect the livers, kidneys, and lymph. I typically add it in first thing in the morning to a little bit of water. I add a little bit of tincture, like a little shot. I take that down before I have my morning coffee, right? Hydrate with minerals. Get your water bottle ready. I carry one around with me. I add electrolytes to it. I carry it around all day. I kind of fill this thing up 3 times a day with water. At least one time a day, I load it up with electrolytes and I'm set for the day. And then it's there for you to take. You can take it in the car with me. So hydrate, add your minerals in. Then if you're on a protocol for detox, you add your binder in, okay, at that point. And the binder should be added more, I would suggest, to make it work well, first thing in the morning, way before you eat your breakfast. You could also add it in after breakfast, an hour after breakfast, and or before lunch. But you really want to have it in place before you take any antimicrobials or any, type of an antibiotic, because you want anything that you're killing to be picked up by that binder that's already on board. So that sequence should make sense to you. Okay, the first line here. Then after that, we go into the food. So you eat your food. You want your food. You get good nutrition. You want your nutrition. You don't want to bind your nutrition. Then after you've eaten, you kind of monitor how you're doing through the day. You monitor any of your bowel movements through the day to make sure that you're moving things out. Also, this is the time you can add in some supportive therapies to this. And that could be adding in your, any kind of support. That could be saunas, it could be lymph drainage, your exercise regime in the morning, rebounding, things to make your body move. Okay, and then you refine it after that, and then you repeat it in the afternoon if you're doing a 2-stage protocol. If you're on antibiotics or an antimicrobial twice a day, then you repeat the whole thing. So that's kind of how we do the whole sequence. And again, we're all different. So there is not one protocol for everyone. We talked about supportive companion therapies. These are important. These are like easy things to add into your life. And what they do is they move out toxins so much easier when you're adding the binder, your protocol, and you do this. It's like, why not make it the best it can be for the best outcome? So gosh, if you get your hands on some glutathione, if your doctor can give you an IV of glutathione or take some liposomal, that really helps, move out the bile. You want to protect, and support your liver, kidneys, lymph. So again, I like having those Bacana remedies, lymph drainage remedies, kidney remedies, etc. Also taking milk thistle, that comes as a tea, or you can take it down in a tincture. It comes in a variety of forms. That really supports your liver, keeps your liver healthy while it's moving toxins through it. Castor oil packs, they've been used for years and years or centuries, I think, but you can learn how to do one online. They're so easy to do. You can do that at night. You can wrap yourself in castor oil. It's great. Colon hydrotherapy. If you can find someone in your local area who does this while you're on a detox protocol, it's great to go in and have that done. Extra magnesium, calcium, vitamin C. You really want to get your vitamins and your nutrients all back in. Your minerals are important. I do find that magnesium and vitamin C will help your bowels move. So if you're going to take them, if you're having constipation, you need to do it to bowel tolerance. Don't overtake it, but you should be able to move your bowels at least when you wake up in the morning. That would be your goal. So at night, you might want to add a little more of those. Rebounding, skin brushing, we talked about that, lymph drainage and sauna, and adding your minerals. Those are key. And I suggest you experiment with them, try them, and add them in from time to time if you can. Okay. And I want to talk a little bit more about sauna integration. Not everyone has one or can afford one. There are some out there. I happen to have one myself and love it, but I'm also a member of a gym, and there's one at the gym. If you can get an opportunity to use one, it's great when you're doing a detox. Sauna does mobilize toxins, and the binders prevent redistribution, because a lot of times you can redistribute toxins even from a sauna. Like if you're not going to be wiping yourself off with a towel, if you use the same towel that you have all toxins on, that they escape also through your skin, they can be redistributed into your body, including heavy metals. So you have to, so taking a binder is really good when you have a sauna, especially if you're going to do an infrared sauna that goes deeper, because everything will move out from the interior organs, that way. So a binder is usually taken 30 to 60 minutes before a sauna and 60 minutes away from food or meds. So just remember that 60 minutes is really a good amount. But if you're just doing a sauna, you can even just do it 30 minutes before. Okay. And sometimes if people are on a heavy duty protocol, they may even want to take another binder right after they've done their sauna. Hydration is key for it again, and you should be having regular bowel movements with this. So you got to make sure that things are moving, so you're getting the full benefit of using your sauna. I recommend an evening sauna after your daily time protocol, just to make sure you get it in to it. It's really good to get that sauna in. Let's see right here. So again, I gave you a real quick, tutorial on binders, but the key takeaways, again, I want to reiterate with you is match your binder to your toxin. Sequence is really important. Drain, bind, mobilize, transport, and excrete. You have to have a mental image of why you're doing what you're doing for the detox protocol. Timing is critical to keeping it going. Okay. So the timing of the day, as we mentioned before, start early, hydrate. The bowel motility is critical. You got to keep the bowels moving. Make a daily, hourly protocol chart to guide your patients and for you to write little notes on to see how you're doing. It feels so good to check off the box. I did this, I did that, I'm done with this, moving it forward. And then to evaluate at the end of the day what's working and not's working. You switch it up and you feel so good saying, wow, this is really working for me. I feel so much better. Teach patients to monitor their symptom progress and report back to you so you can guide them with it. So we need to all learn as medical practitioners. We should all learn and teach and utilize all the supportive protocols that we can. Okay, lymph drainage and sauna use are key for the whole thing. So again, I thank you all for listening to me. I hope you learned a few tips that you can take with you. If you have any questions, please feel free to get in touch with me. My information's here on the screen. And I do want to thank PLMI for the opportunity to share with you today. Thank you.
Well, hello everyone. It's Dr. Jill Carnahan, and I'm going to talk to you today about resilience in a toxic world, mold, mast cell activation, and flow states, one of my favorite topics. Hopefully by the end of this presentation, you'll find how these things all tie together and the absolute importance of understanding these topics when you're dealing with your patient's detoxification. So let's get started. So my story begins on a farm in central Illinois where I grew up with my 3 brothers, 1 sister, parents and what you would consider an idyllic Norman Rockwell-esque environment of the corn and bean fields of Illinois. But unbeknownst to me, there was exposures there on the farm and possibly even in utero in my mother's womb that affected me greatly. When I was 25 years old, many of you know my story, I was diagnosed with an aggressive breast cancer right in the middle of medical school, medical training. And while I fought that battle and won, and now I'm completely in remission 20 plus years later, I remember at the time having the question of what contributed to this incidence of cancer at the young age of 25. In fact, when I was diagnosed at Loyola, I was told, this was in 2001, that I was actually the youngest woman ever diagnosed at that major medical center. Now, unfortunately, it's become more and more common, of course. And so in the years subsequent to that, there's been lots of women in their 20s, even in their teens, that have been diagnosed with breast cancer. So I'm not unique, even though it's still rare. But it led me on a journey to really understand some of the factors that contributed to this diagnosis at such a young age. In that journey of discovery, as I was writing my book, Unexpected, I dug out my father's handwritten records from a journal he had done in 1976, the year I was born, on the chemicals that he had used on the crops that year. It included Lasso, a Monsanto pesticide based on Allichlor, a probable human carcinogen, Sutan, a butyrate-based herbicide associated with skin and respiratory irritation, Sencor, an herbicide that affects the thyroid gland and the liver, Atarax, a weed killer based on the reproductive toxin atrazine, and Furidan, a reproductive toxicant and one of the most toxic pesticides ever made. Now you see a theme here. Not only are these toxic chemicals that are still many of them used today, but there wasn't really a second thought on the farm of Illinois, Indiana, and Iowa. This was really commonplace. And after my diagnosis, I started digging much deeper to see if I could find a connection. I found that over 70% of breast cancers have been contributed to chemical carcinogens or other modifiable risk factors. However, there's a latency of these exposures, so sometimes it's hard to determine if those really contributed or not. And we know the toxic load compared to 20 years ago, so much increase in toxic chemicals. The number of chemicals released into the environment has steadily increased over the years, and it's estimated that 350,000 new synthetic chemicals and unstudied combinations are currently in production and used globally. And only a small fraction of these have ever been tested, either alone or especially in synergistic use. And this environmental toxic load is becoming increasingly burdensome and overwhelming our natural defenses. I often talk about in my clinical practice, the toxic load plus infectious burden is moving together to create immune dysfunction and inflammation and really contributing to all the chronic, complex, and toxic illnesses that we see, including autoimmunity, cancer, neurodegenerative diseases. These are all on the rise. And part of it, if not much of it, is due to this increasing toxic load. So detox is a topic that is absolutely critical to our patients' well-being. Then we know that sometimes infectious processes and the toxic combinations can combine to create mast cell activation syndrome. So mast cells, we were always taught in medical school about mastocytosis, which is a proliferative disorder of the bone marrow. But what we're seeing nowadays is these primordial immune cells that are at the forefront to checking out PAMPs and DAMPs, pathogen-associated molecular patterns, and damage-associated molecular patterns are getting activated much more commonly due to the toxic load and infectious burden. And my belief is that it really is at the core of most functional complex chronic cases that toxic load plus infectious burden lead to systemic overwhelm, immunometabolic dysfunction, and inflammation. So we might ask, what contributes to this toxic load? Well, we have exotoxins on the left side and we have endotoxins on the right. And exotoxins are pretty commonly thought of. That would be things like heavy metals, solvents, volatile organic compounds, including microbial VOCs or mold, organophosphates, some of the chemicals I showed you from my dad's farm records, pesticides, BPA, phthalates, parabens, et cetera, heterocyclic amines. These are from charbroiled meats and foods that we eat. Mold, of course, and many, many persistent organic pollutants such as PCBs, dioxins, difurans, etc. And then we also have endotoxins. These are from inside out. These are a lot of the toxins that come from the gut microbiome if we have overgrowth of bacteria or yeast. Yeast and candida can produce acetaldehyde and even food chemicals added to our food. And even psychological stressors or emotions can contribute to internal toxic load. And you've probably seen this before if you've seen me present on toxicity in the environment. We have this permitted exposure based on the toxicology reports, but often the kinds of patients that we see in clinical practice are harmed by a very small level of exposure that is not clinically significant in the toxicology literature. There's a couple reasons for this. First of all, a lot of us are seeing those that are on that, top 1 or 10% of those affected by chemicals. They might have a single nucleotide polymorphisms that make it more difficult for them to detoxify or identify and tag the antigens, such as in mold toxicity. Or it might just be this hormetic effect that we see, which is a much, much more low level. If you think about the nanograms that we measure estrogen in, these are incredibly small amounts of things that have hormetic or hormone-like effects. That's another way of saying an endocrine disruptor. So some of these chemicals actually have a biphasic curve where at the extremely small levels, they have a very significant hormetic effect that would not typically be acknowledged by the classical toxicologist. Okay, so just framing that, I wanted to frame not only my history with toxic exposure, my breast cancer, and how that all links together, but also mast cell activation. Because if I look back at me growing up on the farm, I had severe allergies, a little bit of breathing issues, eczema, a lot of atopic issues. And I wonder, looking back, if mast cell activation might have been part of the picture at the root, even leading to that diagnosis of cancer. So we'll talk about that briefly here. So mast cells are important with immune regulation and immune modulation. They're often the first cells that respond to any immune intruder or infection or toxin, as we talked about. They interact with environmental antigens. As our toxic load increases, year by year by year, we are seeing an epidemic of mast cell activation disorders of various types. This can be, again, from invading pathogens. Post-COVID, a lot of people had more issues, or just environmentally derived toxins as water damaged buildings and mold exposure is becoming much more of an issue than it used to be. And whether mast cell exists as a primary syndrome or exists as a constellation, we know that understanding the underlying mechanisms and pathways and triggers to mast cell activation is critical in treating these patients. And like I said, if you really understand what the diagnosis and presentation looks like for mast cell activation disorder, you will be shocked to find out how many of your patients fit that picture and will improve their symptoms when you treat those toxic infectious triggers and also the mast cell activation itself. It explains this thing called chemical-induced loss of tolerance, or also toxicant-induced loss of tolerance, or TILT. There's several papers written, especially by our friends Tanya Dempsey and Lawrence Afrin and many other brilliant physicians that are dealing on a day-to-day basis on the front lines with mast cell activation. And we found that there's a correlation with chemical loss of tolerance, or what we might call multiple chemical sensitivity. Again, in the literature, it's referred to as toxicant-induced loss of tolerance, and mast cell activation. So we see that this exposure to pesticides, VOCs, combustible products, and mold have been initiators of this chemical intolerance. And we all know patients who have that, where they can't go down the grocery aisle. Some of them can't even leave their houses because they're so chemically intolerant. Or if there's an air freshener, they can smell it a mile away. And I have many patients like that. So we know that that is linked to mast cell activation. And as I mentioned just a few moments ago, sometimes looking back, I wonder if the whole big picture for my own even cancer risk was related to the mast cell activation, because we see in the literature multiple studies showing increased risk of solid tumors, especially lung and breast and colon, related with mast cell activation. So could it be that even in my own story and journey, one of the underlying factors in my diagnosis at an early age of breast cancer was also mast cell activation at play? It's possible. And in this study, it shows that mast cells may promote development of certain malignant tumors, and that we should just be aware of this and think of that in conjunction of those with mast cell activation as far as increased risk. Okay, so mold. Mold, if you talk to anyone who deals with mast cell activation on a regular basis, many of the people who've written these papers that I'm sharing, they will tell you that mold is probably the number one trigger for mast cell activation, although there are many, right? So we know that mold is connected, and because of natural disasters, flooding, we've just heard about some of that in the news this whole summer long. There's been many incidences where the flooding and poor construction quality and rapid construction and water intrusion are leading to more and more mold growth in our homes and buildings. And we know that chronic mold exposure leads to a wide variety of immunometabolic dysfunction and triggers mast cell activation. Mold mycotoxins, which are the toxins that are excreted by mold, these are less than 2.5 microns in size. They can go directly into our alveoli without even passing liver, because if we ingest mold, it goes through the liver. There's actually a protective effect. When we inhale mold, we do not have that protection. It goes directly into our bloodstream. These mycotoxins are so small, they do not even need a carrier. And as soon as we inhale them, they can be absorbed into the blood. So that's why you'll often find patients who can, within even seconds of being in a moldy building, they may exhibit or experience symptoms because that mycotoxin from the mold has gone directly into their blood. This can trigger mast cells being released, and the inflammatory mediators they excrete, like prostaglandins, histamine, leukotrienes, and cytokines. And these things can contribute to many, many symptoms, respiratory symptoms, cardiac symptoms, neurological symptoms, gut symptoms, permeability symptoms, brain fog, fatigue, and I could go on because what we know at the core, mast cell activation is a multi-system, multi-symptom disease, and that's part of the diagnostic criteria. Chronic mold exposure leads to mycotoxins, which may enter the body, as I talked about, and keep this immune system on high alert. And ongoing mast cell activation then causes an overproduction of all these nasty metabolites produced by the mast cells. They're meant to protect us, but in excess, it can cause inflammation, cytokine release, swelling, brain fog, fatigue, and even I've seen patients so sick, such permeability, that they have fatality from this overactivation of the immune system. And commonly, it can aggravate respiratory issues, cause headaches, brain fog, nausea, and fatigue. So just to review, triggers of mast cell activation, mold is among the top, but also other chemicals, allergens, viruses or bacteria, infections in general, heavy metals, toxins of all types, and even trauma can trigger mast cell activation. So this is really eye-opening because if you look at the list of diseases associated with mast cell activation, they span the gamut from respiratory symptoms to gastrointestinal, things like autism, autoimmunity, Ehlers-Danlos, celiac disease, chronic fatigue, chronic inflammatory response syndrome with mold, fibromyalgia, migraine headaches, multiple chemical sensitivities, as we talked about before, and even POTS or postural orthostatic tachycardia or autonomic dysfunction. And I added the bottom one there, that malignant tumors, because I do believe that part of my story with getting breast cancer at 25 years old in the cornfields of Illinois with all those exposures was likely mast cell activation certainly played a role. So what's the diagnosis? If you want to look up the diagnostic criteria, it's can be found in the Global Consensus 2 statement. And what it involves is a multi-system, multi-symptom disease state. So you have to have more than 2 systems affected. You can see here, for example, dermatologically, you could have rashes, flushing, itching, or hives. You could have cardiovascular symptoms or GI symptoms or neurological. And the criteria includes episodic symptoms consistent with mast cell mediator release affecting 2 or more organs and systems, and decrease in frequency or severity or resolution of symptoms with mediator therapy. So what does that mean? You have symptoms that span more than 2 systems with multiple symptoms. You have a decrease in frequency or severity of symptoms when you treat. And again, we'll get to basic treatments, but that would be H1 blockers, H2 blockers, mast cell stabilizers, and ideally an evidence of elevation in urine or serum markers, things like urinary N-methylhistamine, prostaglandin D2, even tryptase. But you can diagnose this without those markers, because if you're not testing the blood or urine during a flare, sometimes you'll miss those markers and the patient will be negative on testing and still have criteria consistent with mast cell activation. So it's important to not rely solely on tryptase and histamine, especially because there's so much other things released. And here's the article. Again, this is by Theo Theourides, one of the experts in mast cell activation, that talks about just thinking beyond histamine and tryptase are easy serum markers. I test them frequently. But if the patient doesn't have those positive and you haven't tested in the middle of a MCAS flare, it doesn't rule out that they have mast cell activation. And it's actually quite common for those to be negative because there's so many other things involved. Also, it is good to note that many of these tests, some of the urine tests, need to be immediately frozen. So if the patient is not collecting the sample appropriately, you could get false negative results. This is his article and talks about that there are hundreds of mediators that are excreted by mast cells. So if you just rely on histamine and tryptase, you're limiting it to only the degranulation, where there's other angiogenic, fibrotic, anti-inflammatory, pro-inflammatory, and neurotoxic molecules that can be released. So these mast cells really have a large armamentarium of things that they can release, and it's not just histamine, it's way bigger than that. So we need to think about that diagnosis, that it's broader than just a positive tryptase. And we really want to focus on symptom resolution, which we'll get to in just a moment. So mast cells also affect the autonomic nervous system. They can have a potent role in dysautonomia, meaning dysregulation of blood pressure, heart rate, or body temperature. This is increasingly more common. I see much more postural orthostatic tachycardia syndromes, neurogenic hypotension, which doesn't fit the POTS criteria, and other autonomic dysfunction. And frequently it's related to mast cell activation. And in this study, it talked about critical not only for allergic disease, but they have the potential to cause the pathophysiology of dysautonomia and neuroinflammatory disorders. Part of that is because that histamine release causes vasodilation. The blood can pool in the extremities, and the patient stands up and does not have that return blood flow. So preload is down, and we know that preload plus heart rate equals cardiac output. So the heart's only way to deal with that is increase heart rate, and that's where you get POTS. So poor preload, increased heart rate includes tachycardia when you stand up, and that would be your diagnosis of POTS. Now, this is fascinating, and I want to include this because sometimes we're not thinking as broadly as we should be with mast cell activation, and there are so many syndromes of pain that are associated with mast cells. Just look at this list here. We have migraine headaches, chronic prostatitis, bladder pain, fibromyalgia, cancer, sickle cell disease, neuropathic pain, vulvodynia. Even self-injurious behavior has been linked to these things that mast cells excrete. And so it's really important to really think about with chronic pain syndromes, is there a mast cell component at play? So I told you we talk about treatments. There's a variety of treatments, but this is some of the core. You want to think about H1 blockers, H2 blockers. Cromolyn is a mast cell stabilizer. You can use vitamin C and ketotifen, which is one of my favorites because it has multi effects. It stabilizes mast cells, blocks H1, and it can be a leukotriene inhibitor as well. So all of those, and what I find in many of my patients is you need multi-layered treatment. Many of them need, Zyrtec and Pepcid and ketotifen and cromolyn and vitamin C and quercetin. So you can layer these treatments. Here's some other treatments that you can use. Steroids I do not like to use, but they can be powerful if someone is in severe mast cell flare. Non-steroidal anti-inflammatories. We talked about H1 and H2 blockers, leukotriene inhibitors or antagonists, bisphosphonates, and then even things like benzodiazepines and other immune modulating drugs. And then things as simple as quercetin can be powerful. And this study, again, by Theo Theourides, talks about luteolin being even more potent than cromolyn. And so we use luteolin as a nutritional supplement as well, sometimes even PEA due to the pain component. And combining these things and finding what's best for your individual patient is the best way to go. I use many, many different combinations, and no one patient is like any other. Other things you want to think about are a low histamine diet, DAO enzyme support to support the breakdown in histamine from foods in the diet, and you might want to put them on a low histamine diet. That would include avoiding things like fermented foods, things that are leftover, Even like bone broth can be high histamine, kimchi, sauerkraut, things that contain hydrolyzed yeast. All of these things, surprisingly, for some people can be a big trigger for histamine, and a low histamine diet has helped many of my patients. Natural things, we talked about some of these: vitamin C, stinging nettle, butterbar, bromelain, local raw honey, probiotics, astragalus, and probiotics used with caution because some of those strains can increase histamine and others can be neutral or decrease. I find that Lactobacillus rhamnosus and Bifidobacter species and spores tend to be some of the best ones for reducing histamine. And then just identifying sources of toxins or triggers or mold. You want to increase exercise, sweating. You want to promote gut health and decrease intestinal permeability. Make sure the patient's getting enough sleep, reducing stress, and low-dose naltrexone can also be of assistance. Okay, so let's shift from nutrients. So we've covered basically my story growing up and that connection between possible mast cell activation, my atopic diseases, and my cancer, and could there be a connection there? We've talked about mold as a trigger for mast cell activation, and then I defined how to diagnose and treat mast cell activation. And other things that we find incredibly powerful for detox, which is going to be in turn reducing risk of mast cell activation and mold-related illness, is infrared sauna. I really can't talk enough about infrared sauna and the power to reduce toxic load. As you know, I've become the mold expert over the years, and I deal with a lot of patients with mold toxicity. And I would say 99% of them, infrared sauna is a critical part of their treatment protocol. There's different types of infrared, near, mid, and far, and they have different penetrations and different uses. They do have an ability to induce heat shock protein, which enhances glutathione recycling and detox enzymes. So this is a critical way to upregulate detoxification. That sweating can eliminate lipophilic toxins like phthalates, PCBs, heavy metals, and mycotoxins that have been stored in the tissues. And it's absolutely critical to support hepatic blood flow, phase 1 and phase 2 of the liver. So all of this combines to really help us mobilize the toxins from the patient's body. And then often we'll, wipe off the sweat with a towel after sauna, drink plenty of hydration and electrolytes, and even giving them binders or extra glutathione before or after their sauna. We can also modulate mast cell activity with infrared sauna. Lipophilic toxin, as we talked about, can induce mitochondrial damage, and this can trigger mast cell activation. So the more we can help those lipophilic toxins mobilize from the tissues with infrared sauna, the more we can clear them out of the body. Basically, the process is backwards. If we inhale, say, mold toxin through the alveoli into the bloodstream, it gets stored in the tissues. And the reverse of that is mobilizing these lipophilic toxicants out of the tissues back into the bloodstream so that the liver and the kidneys can filter, and we can pee them out and poop them out and get rid of these toxicants through that mobilization and excretion. Now, one word of caution, I find it's always about mobilization and excretion. And mobilization is pretty easy. You up glutathione, you move the tissues, you exercise, you do aerobic activity, you sweat, you get in the sauna. But if you mobilize too quickly and that patient is not excreting, they have poor bowel function, they're not sweating, they're not urinating, they're not eliminating, you can make them more sick if you mobilize too quickly. So really understanding how mobilization and excretion work is critical to getting these patients well in a good manner without excessive symptoms as they go through that. Benefits of far infrared are reducing toxic burden. You can allow them to mobilize and excrete the mold toxins, the VOCs, the metals. It's been shown to lower inflammation by increasing IL-10, decreasing IL-6, and TNF-alpha. It can support mitochondrial activation, ATP production, and it can promote parasympathetic tone, vagal nerve calming of the system. And these are all so powerful. And if you've ever sat in an infrared sauna, you know that feeling of just how good that warmth feels. And so many people almost get addicted to it because it feels so wonderful on the body. I use this regularly every single week, and I encourage my patients to do the same. Not all saunas are created equal, however. Obviously, I'm a big fan of sunlight in saunas. The heater quality matters. You want to make sure there is clinically tested, consistent, optimal wavelengths for maximal absorption so that they actually have studies to show the kind of heat they're producing. You want to prioritize low EMF heaters. You want to avoid off-gassing of the woods. A lot of these like generic saunas you can get online or at the big box stores actually have a toxic effect when you heat the wood. And I feel like that could be the worst error, is getting a sauna that actually heats up and produces more toxins instead of reducing the toxic load. You want to consider third-party testing for peace of mind, and you want to have a preference for brands with published clinical studies and third-party testing. Look for saunas used and recommended by health experts like me. And like I said, Sunlighten is my top choice for a clean. In fact, I just got my Impulse sauna and have been really enjoying that. The Impulse Smart Sauna has a full spectrum, near, medium, and far. It has, which is wonderful for collagen production, skin, anti-aging. And the new Solo system, which you can see at the bottom, is amazing for portability and use. Budget friendly. It folds up into a small space, so you can take this with you or keep it in your living room and bring it in or out. It does not require a extra electrical outlet, so it's very easy to use without adding in a special outlet. And key features are the patented heater tech, clinically tested saunas, and the optimal wavelength delivery, both for home and clinical use. Okay, guys, let's wind up. And I just want to give you, I always say these things can be very, very complex, but the top clinical takeaways are clean air, clean water, clean food. So important. And I've recently added clean mind, clean body. So knowing that the air that we breathe is clean, using air filtration whenever needed, putting in a high MERV rating into your furnace filter, clean water, drinking clean water, avoiding plastic water bottles, having a reverse osmosis or adequate filtration system, at least in the water that you drink in, bathe in, and cook in. Clean mind is just taking care of those emotions, being present, living an embodied neuroplastic life is a great way to say that. And then anything we do to clean the body, I do Epsom salt baths, infrared sauna, and all of these wonderful things that we can do. And then by special request, I want to end with some ways that we can get into flow. Flow, I feel like I wrote again about this in my book, Unexpected, is such a way to harness the healing power of the body. When the body's in that state, it's a divine, wonderful, parasympathetic state. We have optimal creativity and performance. And here's some tips to get into flow. You can choose something you already love or try something new. You want to have challenging, but not too hard. There's an optimal skills challenge ratio. If it's too hard, you'll give up. If it's too easy, you won't stay focused, but somewhere right in between where you're challenging yourself to something new, but not too hard, is a great way to get into flow. You want to really clear other distractions, minimally set aside at least 3 or 4 hours so you can get into that activity, whether it be music, creativity, writing, creating art, or some sport activity, surfing, rock climbing, motorcycle riding, any of these things, and pick your own, choose your own adventure. You want to teach yourself something new. Find something you've been wanting to do. Dancing, surfing. I learned to rock climb in my 40s. You want to avoid multitasking. Turn that phone off, turn off all alerts, and be present. Breathe through it. Often that breath will bring you into flow and get you a sustaining flow. And what you'll find is it's also an optimal state of mental performance. Your most bright ideas and the best insights and some of the best writing I've ever done have been in flow. You can add music. I have a couple soundtracks that are flow music that I use when I'm writing or focusing. And I love adding PEMF mat, red light therapy, or infrared sauna just before so that you can jumpstart the process. And this is a quote from my book: by enlisting flow and changing our mindset, we can rewire our brain in a very real way that makes us more resilient through a phenomenon called neuroplasticity. So thank you all so much for letting me join you today for this presentation. We will join you in just a few minutes on the panel discussion.
Well, here we are again. This is, for me, one of my favorite times in these PLMI educational series, and that is the chance to have a little bit of a playing jazz with these thought leaders about the topic at hand. And you never know how the organicity of this conversation will go, but it always leads to something that is an aha. I found that there's always kind of like some news to use that as we kind of do a post-hop discussion about the program. And the program, to me, is right in the frontier of what is really in the major theme of healthcare right now, which is toxicity and detoxification. I was playing with this topic a little bit last night. Playing is probably the wrong word. I was kind of deep diving into it as it relates to how important toxicity is emerging to be seen in fertility and developing infants and children. And, it used to be considered kind of a wild card in science. You can bring this up and they would say, well, there's some suggestion, but no real proof of association and still open to controversy. I don't think that's true at all today. I think the concept of toxicity in youth is an extraordinarily important, well understood, but yet fully executed upon concern. And you all represent a really important part of this dialogue and this discussion because we're going to be talking about therapeutic options. We can't completely change the environment as much as we would like to, but we can change some of the internal things that people do to help them be more resilient to the environment. So that leads into our discussion, and I'm very excited actually that the more we study how the environment influences our body's ability to be resilient to bioconcentrated toxins that come from all different sources. And in my introductory to this particular topic, I talked about endotoxins and exotoxins and bioaccumulation and biomagnification and total load and all those concepts that we know play important roles in defining the pathogenesis or the adverse health effects of low-level toxins from a variety of sources and how they're bioaccumulated. And it's interesting to note because the field of immunotoxicology and neurotoxicology, which originally were around acute toxicity, poisons, have now been really extended to include these chronic, long-term, low-level toxins that impede functional activity at the neurological and the immunological systems and produce so many hosts of side effects. So then we're searching for ways to remediate that, and you are leaders in remediation. You are people who have brought us to understand the multifactorial ways by which that occurred. So I'd like to start off, and maybe I'll go with Dr. Carnahan first. Jill, if you might not kind of start the conversation, helping us to understand from your experience how prevalent toxic burden and chronic illness is and what you consider to be the biggest contributor that people have only recently started to recognize to this burden might be.
Yeah, as you know from my presentation, I am very deeply involved because my story on the farm and the chemicals and that has led to me being an environmental expert and really so passionate about going deep with these things because I really believe, even in functional, integrated, personalized circles, it is the elephant in the room. It is the thing that we're knowing about, but we're wondering, how do we assess? How do we treat? How do we deal with this? Because so often it's that environmental aspect that's keeping the patients ill. And that's really in this last decade, taking the complex chronic illness to a whole new level of complexity and chronicity. The things that I see on the horizon that I think are a really big deal that are difficult are PFAOs. They're forever chemicals. They're in most of the water supplies. We don't really know how to detox them. And once they're in our land and our water and our food, how do we get rid of them? Do we even know those answers? Plastics. It is astronomical, the amount of plastics in our environment. We don't have great ways to detoxify them. And then, of course, my favorite is mold. And mold, I don't know all the reasons. I can suspect that because of increasing natural disasters and water damage and actually very poor construction, there is an exponential increase in the incidence of water damage in buildings. I'm seeing it all the time. So all these things are kind of coming together to coalesce to this toxic load we've talked about for decades in functional medicine. But the truth is, it's at proportions now that our body can no longer keep up the bailing of that boat, that leaky boat, that toxic load. So people of all ages, of all states, of all types are coming down with chronic illness just because their detox systems can no longer keep up.
Well, that's a fantastic way to jump into this discussion among us, because one of the things that you all have contributed in this program is what I would call integrated detoxification, integrative detoxification, that it's not just one shot on goal. There are many, many different things that need to be done to lower the body burden of these agents that adversely affect the functional integrity of our nervous and immune systems and virtually every organ of our body. So, Connie, maybe I could jump over to you here for a second with this concept of integrated detoxification and and talk a little bit about how you, as a pioneer in the field of infrared therapeutics, started to connect into the detoxification part of the story.
Yeah, and thank you for having me again this year. I love being part of this. Such an important, it's just so important the work that you're doing in PLMI. So, I mean, I saw this firsthand with my brother who was chronically ill from heavy metal toxicity and tried everything and went everywhere to cure himself over 20, gosh, now over 25 years ago. Crazy how time is passing. And it really wasn't until he learned about the wavelength of infrared light and infrared heat that he was able to start using infrared heat specifically to detoxify his body, and slowly but surely was able to take those levels of mercury that were at, just at an excessive level. It was causing him to be so sick, so tired. He physically looked different, he was just, debilitated. And time, once he started to do 5 minutes, 10 minutes every day, started to get inside an infrared sauna, it changed his life. And so that was my first exposure. And then I decided to commit the rest of my life to understand this powerful wavelength, to understand, the value of light energy, the importance. It's not really even value. I mean, it's critical for every living thing. Like, you have to have light energy, and the more you can have it into your body, into your cells, to supercharge your cells, the healthier you're going to be, the longer life you're going to live. And most importantly to me is not only the long life, but it's how you feel while you are living, and feeling great, and extending your health span as long as possible. So that was my connection to this topic. And I spent the rest of my life, researching and learning and meeting with people and hearing their stories and doing everything I can to help as many people make that same transformation.
Well, I really want to give you a shout out. I think what you've done with Sunlighten is truly pioneering. I think you've taken a concept which was nascent and you professionalized it, and you brought it up to a level where people start to understand it and feel comfortable with it. It's not some back room closet thing. You plug in some lights like we used to with black lights in our fluorescent banners when I was in high school. And you really have made this a respectable tool that we find now in centers around the world that are doing integrative healthcare and what I call integrated detoxification. So, Debbie, tell us a little bit about how you see this fitting into the arsenal and the portfolio of therapeutics. And then I'm going to challenge the three of you here in a moment. And so I want you to put on your 5-point harnesses, because I think I may have something that you have an aha. So let's first go to Debbie.
Well, I began using it in my personal arsenal in the beginning of me finding out about natural treatments for Lyme disease. I had a daughter that was suffering with that. And from around 2005 to 2008, during the time period where you couldn't really find anything online and the doctors weren't knowing what to do, I stumbled upon a few MDs that were kind of undercover Lyme literate doctors before that was even a phrase, right? And one of them was helping us along our path, had just purchased a Sunlighten sauna and said, Debbie, this would be phenomenal for you. And she was learning about it. And immediately I said, I'm getting one of these. And I bought one for myself and my daughter. And it was during a time where my daughter had already been on multiple antibiotics, had been on a lot of therapies, and she was toxic from the therapies that she was on top of things. And so I saw the value of it, and she was getting better and better. So that kind of was my first foray into learning about frequencies and light. And from that, a lot of the doctors I was involved with were familiar with Dr. Klinghardt. He had heard about me. My daughter had gotten 100% better from Lyme disease from various things that we had done, including the therapies. He had contacted me and told me that I was supposed to be the director of his academy. I didn't know what that meant, literally. I was coming from nowhere, but I had a lot of experience learning about detox with my daughter and learning about the therapies and working with patients. I've been there, done that. So since 2010, I thought it was just a little journey. I've been on this journey. Started with him. I ran the whole academy, certified practitioners, and learned about the value of frequencies and light in a nutshell, and the value of how important it is to understand how our body works, how important frequencies are about our electrical system. These doctors also do muscle testing, so they use a lot of that to fine-tune individual protocols for the most ill patients of the world. It's the ones you're all seeing now. They're toxic, and they're all individual. They have different DNA, they have different issues going on. So a part of all of that has always been how to help these patients move forward in detox. So I've learned a lot of strategies. I've learned biophotomodulation. We teach that. I've been teaching that for years at our workshops. My big thing is teaching about light. I've learned all about various types of binders to use for detox, all the other pieces of the puzzle that go along with it, and guiding patients individually where specifically ones that have had children that are very toxic after birth. So back to the topic that you had brought up, it's something that's near and dear to my heart. The whole autism spectrum of children. The doctors I have been working with have find that at birth, when they test them, they're full of the toxins that they were downloaded from the mother at birth. Once we were able to figure out specific things using muscle testing and regular lab work, we're able to figure out what their problem was. A lot of them couldn't methylate at all. And you find the history with the mother, there's some unique histories. There's always unresolved emotional issues that created what we may call, in the work that our doctors do, called APN, applied psychoneurobiology. What is the root? Why is our body not able to detox like it used to? And we know that the toxins are abnormal that we're getting in our environment today. That's adding on to something that has been there anyway. So figuring out exactly how to move forward individually with patients and using light and frequencies. I do believe that the future of medicine is going to be with light. We've seen it with lasers, LEDs, using very low level lights. And I do think our bodies resonate with that. It brings life, because without light and frequencies, we're dead. So that's kind of like my thought.
I think you're right. This whole
Yeah.
the whole question of bioelectric medicine is really starting to gain attraction across every aspect, from diagnostic to therapeutics. And I think the power that we discussed in our previous program that we did last year with Sunlighten, about the ability of near infrared to penetrate more deeply into the subfascia, is a really important part of the story here, that we're not just superficially working on the outer layers of the skin, that we're actually having a physiological effect on the vasculature. So I'm now going to challenge the three of you for a second. This is geekism. This is Jeff Bland geekism. So maybe I'll direct this to my fellow geek here. And start, if I can, with Jill. So I got very interested in thinking about this family of molecular chaperones called heat shock proteins. And heat shock proteins, which have kind of risen up in the field of molecular medicine, cell biology, to be seen very, very important in maintaining health and function. And what they do is they take misshapen proteins in the body, which is part of the normal process of, it's part of the abnormal process of toxicity, is it misshapes proteins. I won't go into the molecular details, just say it misshapes proteins. And when proteins are misshaped, they can't function very well because they have a specific shape they need to be in order to do their work. And these molecular chaperones called HSPs, heat shock proteins, actually refold the proteins back into their native shape. So they're like they're reactivators of damaged protein. And it turns out, by the name heat shock proteins, they're influenced by the environment, particularly heat. And so I got very interested in this, saying, well, I wonder if heat shock proteins are activated by infrared saunas. And is there any evidence of their activity? Well, as I got into that, I recognized that the mechanism of heat shock proteins is that they are intimately connected together with cytochrome P450s, the detox enzymes. They reform and reactivate CYP450s, the detox enzymes. They play a very important role in redox cycling, and they have a very direct effect on mitochondria, because mitochondria are energy centers with their iron cytochromes, and they absorb and utilize energy, as we know. And they're very important, these heat shock proteins, in heavy metal detoxification for activation of metallothionein, which is one of the principal agents that binds mercury and takes it out of the body. And so there's a wide body of literature. I'm just kind of superficially touching on the topography of the literature. But then I asked the second question. I said, given all these roles that heat shock proteins have, is there evidence that infrared sauna impacts heat shock protein activation? And boom, out explodes all this new literature. All sorts of citations within the last couple of years at the cell biological level, how thermal stress induces heat shock protein expression, that this goes through a mechanism through heat shock protein 70 in particular, that's highly responsive to infrared sauna, and that there is a body of literature that shows that infrared sauna has a ability, because of its ability to penetrate the skin to the deeper level that activates these proteins, plays a principal pleiotropic role across all these detox pathways, both for heavy metals and fat-soluble toxins, without really just causing perspiration to occur. We used to think you sweat it out. Well, there is part of that that's true, but that's only a portion of what's going on cellularly. We're actually talking about activating cellular processes that transport toxins out of the body into the urinary tract and into feces. So with that as kind of a broad-based introduction, let me jump over to you, Jill. From your clinical experience, do you see kind of evidence that infrared saunas have some of those pleiotropic benefits?
Yeah, I feel like I love where this discussion is going, because really the old days we'd do a 21-day detox, or we'd eat celery juice or some really thing that doesn't have a lot of evidence for a certain amount of time. And what I have found that I like to teach patients is you have to pick and choose and be actively involved in setting up daily habits. It has to be a daily exercise or a weekly exercise, or a thing that is incorporated into your lifestyle. No other, if you come to me and we do an 8-week protocol for detox of mold, it's not going to work. You have to incorporate. And for me, the things that are at the very core of that is getting in the sauna, moving your body. Exercise has phenomenal, like we can never forget. In fact, it's funny, that's been my spiel lately, because a lot of times as functional doctors, we maybe don't prescribe exercise in detail, at least not, I'm not an exercise physiologist, but that movement. And what better, sometimes I'll have people move in the sauna, or use heat as an adjuvant, and then Epsom salt baths. And I always say clean air, clean water, clean food. Some of these really, really, really basic things I think we forget. And to me, the sauna is a really, really basic thing that we should all be incorporated. I have one right down the hall here, daily or weekly, or however that looks but it has to be habits. It can no longer be we go to a specialist and we get a protocol, because there's such an insult on our bodies on a daily basis that if we are not bailing out that bucket in a habitual way, we are behind the 8 ball.
So Connie, let me jump up to you. So have you heard the heat shock protein story at all? And if so, are you riding on that horse? Because it's this heat shock protein 70 and its association with stabilizing mitochondrial proteins and improving cytochrome P450 oxidative detoxification, seems like it's a really good feature set benefit for those people who are geeks and want to know what is going on at the cellular level.
Yes, we have, and yes, we are. On that bus, train, whatever you want to call it. I want to just build. I love what Dr. Carnahan said about movement, and so part of what we learned with activating heat shock proteins and how the entire infrared spectrum works with your cells, specifically your mitochondria, is this wonderful, I always have this visual of this wonderful connection with flow and movement inside your body. So when Dr. Carnahan talks about the importance of exercise and movement, with your body, like physically, tangibly, it's also important to get the body moving inside, with your cells, and get those water molecules moving, and get everything dancing and flowing and, changing. Like that's what causes so many positive benefits. And infrared, we know, sets off this biochemical cascade in your body with all the different processes and all the different systems, that leads to, significant benefits, such as activating our heat shock protein. So yeah, we're actively involved with spreading the word and helping people to incorporate it in their life. I mean, it's one tool of many. The good news about this tool is you can stack it with other great things. So you could do castor oil packs, and you can do meditation, and you could do breath work, and you can do stretching, and you could do yoga while you're inside there. And so there's really no excuse, to take this whole concept of this toxic world we live in and to be proactive and take control and empower ourselves to individualize our routine. This is a great choice, is one of those elements of routine.
So as the three of you look at the technology of infrared sauna and its therapeutic value, what do you think the barriers are in its adoption, acceptance, and greater utilization? Or do you feel like now we've broken through those barriers and it's much more well accepted?
Well, I'll speak real quickly on that, and then I'd love to hear everybody else's thoughts. But no, I don't think we have, broken through. I think there's some elements of breakthrough with certain groups, but I think there's still a level of education and knowledge of light energy, of heat energy, of just understanding that, for example, we talked about how you don't have to sweat profusely to get the detox benefits. And that's such a powerful statement, but one that it's counterintuitive and they don't necessarily understand. And we try and help explain that it's just one of the detox pathways, and infrared helps with all of the detox pathways. But it's just education, and it's something, fortunately, that we're really committed, to helping with. And we're not going anywhere. We're just going to continue along to bring light, to this topic, and to continue to forge ahead and help people to understand as much as possible. But we're not there yet, but that's okay.
Well, you're definitely leading the validation of the technology, and you can see what happens when you put professionalism behind something as an idea. It starts to stand up and be more well accepted. Jill, how about you with your patients? How do they respond to the concept of infrared saunas? Is it something you've got to spend a lot of time explaining, or do they intuitively seem to understand it?
So I just want to say we could learn a lot from our European friends, because they have them everywhere. If I rent an Airbnb in Europe, often I'll have a sauna in my house. Like that's just so common. So I think the couple barriers, first of all, cost can be a barrier, but even Sunlighten has come up with a smaller unit, a more affordable unit, a more personalized unit. And that's really what it is finding the way to get this in a way that's affordable. Number two, access. Well, we have one in our office, so patients come in and they pay a very small fee to use our sauna. So that's a way a lot of medical offices are incorporating this. And I think that's going to be the future of all gyms and all places where you would go to get some sort of fitness training. You just automatically have access to the sauna, the cold plunge, and the light therapies and things as we see these. And then lastly is just time. But I think, Connie, you alluded to this, I'm like, okay, what is it that you really want to do? Do you want to read a book? Do you want to listen to a podcast? Is there something that you're not having time to sit down and do that thing? Combine this with another habit that you want. So it's actually a treat. It's a reward. So for me, I'll go in and maybe listen to a podcast I didn't. Now, some people say, well, then you get EMFs. Well, there's all these other things, but the truth is the benefits outweigh the risks there. And I think it's always good to figure out what way can you reward yourself by doing a behavior and creating a habit that's going to sustain you long term. So I talk to them and then they light up. It's like, oh yeah, I've been wanting to watch that show, or I've been wanting to read this book. And then they have the time built in, and I prescribe it. So that's the other thing, maybe just speaking to doctors, you need to be prescribing this. If you can get HSA money or reimbursement, it's medically appropriate. I write letters all the time for my patients to get this either reimbursed completely as a medical expense, to get HSA money for that, and there's very good literature to support it as a medical necessity in most of my patients.
Oh, that's really fantastic news to use. It's interesting. I was speaking with Callie Means recently, actually last week, a little bit about his company that is trying to get HSA money available for all sorts of health and wellness therapies and some of the uphill battle he's having. But this concept of the infrared sauna to me is maybe one of the more easy entries because it does have so much good data and good science supporting its advocacy. By the way, you used a great play on words there when you talked about people get lit up by this opportunity. I thought that was a wonderful, great play on words. So I think that what you all are talking about is just nothing short of a therapeutic tool that seems to be in the primacy of focus for people who are really suffering from long-term kind of symptoms associated with low energy, fatigue, immune dysfunction. I mean, the list goes on. Debbie, you talked quite a bit about Lyme, but I would assume that probably you could talk through things like chronic fatigue, fibromyalgia, all sorts of companion conditions associated with mitochondriopathies that you would suggest are valuable to be put into infrared therapy as well. Can you
Well,
get some
definitely.
experience?
Yeah. With all of that, and including mold seems to be the biggest thing that people have. If they have one thing, they have a fungal infection. If they have Lyme, then they have parasites. It goes around, and the bacterial infections, they all kind of come together. And definitely have seen positive results with it. But again, I agree with what the other lady said, the cost. Jill was talking about that. I tend to hear from the patients after they've seen the doctor. They've gotten their diagnosis. They have a slew of supplements they're taking. They're doing all these tests, and they're told they need to get a sauna. They find me. I get calls from around the world regularly saying, you know what, I wish I was at this doctor's or another doctor that I could go to that'll take my insurance, right? Number one, because they pay out of pocket to see all the naturopathic doctors. And then they said, they want me to go get a sauna. You tell me, what should I spend my money on? I've got a sick child. It's usually a sick child is when they call. And they have like nothing left. They've spent their like life savings and they're afraid to tell the doctor. They don't make the appointment again to go back. It's because they're overwhelmed with the costs. And I have worked with many of these patients and telling them what I truly have seen, witnessed, and believe that if I was going to choose a few things, if I could put money aside and if they could put some money aside or ask for help from grandma, grandpa to get a sauna, you can all use it. I have had parents call me back, bringing tears to my eyes. I was starting to write down numbers as they call me. My child is healed. And I said, excuse me? My child is healed. I said, what does that mean? Do you remember me? And a few times, I don't remember everyone that calls, but a few of them I've remembered. And I said, well, what do you mean? My child, for the first time, can speak at the dinner table and look us in the eyes and say, I love you, mom and dad. So, wow, do you know how old this child was? Did we tell you? I said, no, they're talking 30 years old for this child. 30 years
Oh, my word.
that the child has not been able to do that. And they're on the spectrum, obviously. But that's just one example of many, many, many where people, for them, that's healed. Okay. They still have everything else going on, but they can communicate with the child. So I found that sauna and some of these other therapies combined, when you do the right ones, take layers off, immediately take layers off. And I think if any child is in the spectrum, I always say, can you get a sauna? Can you find one? Get your child in that. And a few other things too, besides a sauna. I don't just push them, I say I do believe and I've witnessed. So layers off.
Well, that's one of the things I've learned from Dr. Carnahan, and she's such a marvelous clinician and educator, but this concept of using multiphasic approach, this integrated detoxification is really where the gold lies. And there's a little bit of art in this as to know what the patient is going to respond to, how they're going to accept and build it into their daily program. But Jill, you've been a master in teaching the field, really, how to be a sensitive and persuasive clinician to get people to do things that may be different than what they've thought usual and customary. And the proof of the pudding is their outcome. And once they have positive outcome, they become your best lifelong friends and vice versa. And you have quite a family of friends out there in the world, that's for sure. Thousands of people. So, Connie, anything you wanted to say in close here as it relates to this this rap that we're doing, this little jazz that we're playing together?
Well, we have had the opportunity to have success with HSAs. So I did want to mention that because that was like such a, a great mind-blowing comment. And I love the approach of solutions that we're all talking about, and just really thinking of ways, collectively to improve the quality of people's lives. And this is, infrared energy is one of many different, options. But having, the ability to be here with all of you today, and continue this journey together, because it's really a collaboration of helping people, through education and awareness and tools and resources and programs like this, that people become informed, and after becoming informed, they may become empowered and they can take control of their own lives. So I'm thrilled to be here. I love what you do. It is an honor to work with PLMI, and I look forward to October.
Well, we feel the same about our relationship with Sunlight, and I think that it's a testament when we get a couple thousand clinicians who sign up for these courses as to how hungry they are for information that will provide solutions to these complex health problems that their patients are experiencing. And I think that it's a testament to what you all are doing. I mean, we're pushing the envelope forward. This is still not like the first level of discussion in most medical school education. But, it's on the other side, what really works, that I think we're all focused on, and how does it rank up in terms of safety and efficacy? If we look at safety and efficacy, this is a winner all the way. So,
And Dr.
I wanna
Bland,
thank-
if I could just say really quick, because you have clinicians listening, I think it's important that I actually challenge most of the most powerful learning I've ever done is start with myself. And I think I just want to say to the clinicians, if you don't know how to use sauna, if you're not sure about it, not sure how to recommend it, go out and use one or buy one yourself, because the powerful experience that I've had with infrared sauna has been in my own protocol and understanding, wow. And as you talk, Debbie, you talk about these experiences. I just think I want to challenge that. If you're not sure about it, why don't you just try it yourself? Because when you understand the power, you can't not do it, and you can't not recommend it to your patients.
That's a great story. Thank you for saying that.
That's
Because
where the
that's where
tar
all
meets
the
the road.
Yeah, that's where all the stories that we, I was watching some stories before this,
Mhm.
the people that send their videos in, and gosh, I mean, that's where it all comes from, right? Is just that whole personal transformation. And so that's where it starts.
It sure does, and it starts with people who have dedicated a lot of their lives to what you're doing. Starts with you. So thank you very, very much. On behalf of PLMI, I want to thank you and Sunlight for the sponsorship of this program. I know this is going to touch many, many people. I hope those of you that are viewing this will share this with your colleagues. This is a transformative opportunity to put another tool in your toolkit. Thanks a million, you three. Really appreciate it. Be well.
Thank you so much.
Thank
you.
you.
Chance of being here. Thank you.
Thank you.